The tests for all of the damned dozen were carried out. But what else is there during the regular checkup? Dante then spoke of a disaster that was laid by Yi Sang, which was caused by an innocent and tragically casual comment. Sometime after this final test was done, Maton asked them to please vacate the room, as the mess is being cleared up. Yi Sang apologized as Don Quixote needed a moment as Rocinante's shoelaces had come undone. And this surprised Ishmael as, well, she remembered tying 7 different knots on her shoes, knowing what would happen if they came off again. I can see why they'd be tied as securely as possible. Don Quixote regretted that this was forced on Rocinante. She tied them again in the shape of a ribbon. Roger agreed that knots didn't look great. Ribbons were cute. This was infuriating to Ishmael, yet Yi Sang wondered what would happen if she freed her feet from Rocinante in her current state. Don Quixote saw this as unthinkable. He's her eternal steed, bound to her eternally. He was asking Faust, but he appreciated her answer regardless. What Faust said would set this unfortunate event forward. Faust didn't know. Roger was surprised by this. Faust told them that there was no relevant data to come up with a conclusion. Roger thought that it would be a good idea to find out as they're in a secure location. Yes, a secure location to do this. Faust saw this as highly inadvisable. Ishmael agreed, based on what she heard about what happened in the warp train. The moments that the shoes came off. And Dante confirmed this. Don Quixote wanted to give her thoughts on this, that it was an independent decision made by Rocinante due to extreme circumstances that were not really to do with her own will. In that case, it was Cassetti trying to make a second kindred into a 7th kindred. Ishmael called it potato. Hohenheim was already aware that the core of that individual was in her pair of running shoes. This angered Don Quixote, due to him seeing her as a useless shell. Gregor asked what if they slipped her shoes off and on again, really quickly. Hohenheim told him that LCA standards demanded precise measurements, where they would be meaningless if all they were measuring was a hollow shell. Don Quixote was resisting the urge to insert her lance right up his. Faust wasn't going to tolerate this predictable provocation any longer. He's clearly not received the full report of what happened during that instance. Never mind the Le Manchelan mission. If he did, he would not be so eager to provoke Don Quixote. He's risking the occurrence of an unexpected event. Hohenheim didn't share her concerns, as the lab is built quite securely. Not even powerful abnormalities could even puncture holes in the walls. He then mocked her for her unwillingness and decided to record it in his research journal. Due to the concerned sinner's utterly terrified reaction at the prospect of having to remove her shoes, I must unfortunately leave only a half-complete test result here. Don Quixote was provoked by this. Clearly a lance up his is now the least of his problems. He made it clear that the research reports. Alyssa finished that by saying that they're stored for at least a decade. They will have possession of a full record of their plain cowardice for at least 10 years. Don Quixote was struggling to contain herself. Martin added, outcome, non-applicable. Reason, subject was too scared to participate. No, it's because of what might happen if she did so. Yes, if you knew what happened last time, you wouldn't be so eager for this. Don Quixote decided to change her mind regarding this, where she'll demonstrate that she is still herself without Rocinante. Dante asked Faust if she's sure if it was a good idea. Faust warned that his willful negligence might be the cause of his termination of his employment, all due to his highly irresponsible level of curiosity. Dante understood this to mean, we can carry out this experiment, but on your head be it. Hohenheim saw it as his greatest honor as a researcher. Roger hoped that Yi-Sang can slip them back on if anything goes wrong. Yi-Sang would be ready for that. Don Quixote was ready as well, not expecting anything to go wrong. She was angered by the provocations, yet she took the shoes off, even though the 7-layered knot was difficult to untie. This was Ishmael's handiwork, and Ishmael was hoping that they'd never be untied. But Don Quixote was able to untie the laces and took off Rocinante. Then she was taken over by something. Dante was nervous, as was the rest of the damned dozen. Why didn't they stop this? Was it because they didn't think that losing Rocinante meant that she'd lose control? Because they saw what it did within the warp train and La Mancha land? Or was it because they assumed that Rocinante was now just a disguise to allow her to pass for human? That she understands her past as Sancho, where it wouldn't affect her at all if it was removed. But it wasn't wise to assume. The researchers didn't know what they were dealing with, what it was like to deal with a second kindred. They did. Then Dante heard a voice saying, "Mother, oh mother, our existence is death and perpetuity. Complete us, fill our hunger. We pray unto you. Fill us with the blood of humans, with the blood of humans." Dante could feel that through Don Quixote, those voices echoing in their head. All the voices of the children that was embraced. Either that or a blood fiend's instinct given that voice, imprinted onto them when they were made into a kindred. Proliferate the disease. Embrace this unending hunger for blood. Propagate the family. So many voices, so many yearning, so much desire. Every single kindred that has ever existed in the past kneels before Don Quixote. The voices cry out to dearest mother as her children. So, when shall they be permitted to quench that thirst for blood? This overwhelmed Dante, who felt that they must drink blood, to drink all of the blood that the family deserved to drink. They must. Ishmael told them to wake up. Heathcliff was reminded of the last time when the fire on their head suddenly exploded, which was the mission involving the Kurokumo clan and the Blade lineage before they headed to Wuthering Heights. Dante knew that they had to get a hold of themselves, despite feeling that thirst, which doesn't make sense as they shouldn't feel that in that body. They snapped out of it, and Faust asked what they saw. Dante told them that They want to bring Don Quixote back. They need to quench her thirst somehow. The combined thirst of every single kindred. Gregor saw how bad the situation was, asking if there was any blood kept there. Martin remembered blood samples being around. Urtis didn't think that would be enough. Sinclair was asking if they were just going to sit there and do nothing. Heathcliff asked if it was just a matter of getting her shoes back on. Gregor, remembering that, told Yisang to put them back on. Yisang tried to, but a wall of pressure surrounded her, preventing this. Ryushu complimented the luxury death stick that she was given by Alyssa, who bought them with her last bonus pay. So she thinks that they're well and truly boned. Hohenheim was unconcerned about the danger to their lives, as all he saw was incredible readings. So much power, even in an emaciated state. Now this Heathcliff off. He provoked her, knowing this would happen? Apparently this was beyond even his most extreme of predictions. Heathcliff asked how the he can be so calm about this. They have to do something. He hasn't seen how hard she hits. Hohenheim was unconcerned, seeing no use in panicking now. If the outcome doesn't align with the predictions, they need to analyze the given data. However, containment won't be enough. He's relying on them to clear up the mess that he had a part in making. Fast, cool, well, she paused for a few seconds before telling everyone that it's time to pay the price of curiosity. Then they fought a bloodlusting and feral Sancho, who fought more or less in the same way as in her boss battle, but once she reached 60% of her maximum HP, she charged up her power and made a larger lance and leaped into the air and shot a blood explosion at those that sought to suppress her. Either she was holding back last time, or she's stronger than she was previously. She saw herself as needing to be the mother of all of them. To tell all of them, the families first, it was then that Virgilius stepped in. She wasn't going to be the mother of anyone there. He stepped in as the failsafe, in case Sancho was to lose control, as she did now, telling her that she was a sinner, nothing more. He charged in, their weapons clashing, and then he manifested his EGO and held nothing back against the out-of-control blood fiend. He was able to suppress Sancho, who for reasons that are currently unexplained was out of control, despite this never happening before when taking the shoes off. This also proves that he's an effective failsafe in case Don Quixote lost control. Whether it be his own combat prowess, his EGO that allows him to control blood, which could nullify Sancho's powers, or a combination of the two. Yes, he suppressed her. I suspect that this is one occasion when he's allowed to intervene, as he understands that they won't be as forgiving the second time he did so outside of the terms of his contract, especially as Sancho seemed to be more powerful than last time, where the others were able to subdue her before taking care of the first kindred last time, but seemed to have problems this time. If Virgilius was allowed to take on the first kindred, it'd possibly be a more balanced matchup, considering that he was able to defeat Sancho with not too much difficulty, but it certainly wasn't an easy fight. Virgilius, after taking care of Sancho, told Dante that he wouldn't place the blame regarding that incident on anyone. And this surprised them. Virgilius understood that none could have predicted that outcome, given what they didn't know regarding Rocinante, the binding tool that first kindred Don Quixote gave to Sancho. He then went back to where Charon was. Dante didn't have much first-hand experience with watching Virgilius fight, but this was certainly the most exhausted they'd seen him after a fight. Well, before that fight, he held off an army of weaker undead beings, not one powerful being. That was likely an upper urban nightmare threat, bordering on starve the city. Dante decided not to say anything about this and invert time to put Don Quixote back together, while Yisang put Rocinante back on her feet, either before this or immediately after she was put back in one piece, before she went blood crazy again. Don Quixote felt an overwhelming amount of shame. Dante asked her what happened. Did she lose consciousness, or was her memory affected? She made it clear that her memories were fine. She heard something as soon as she removed her shoes. Dante understood what she meant. It was the voices, and this surprised her, that they witnessed what she was experiencing. She heard voices, so many voices. This surprised Ishmael. Don Quixote made it clear that this was, well, they were the voices of her family, which didn't make sense to Sinclair as she wiped out all of them, the blood fiends of La Mancha Land, but he didn't mention the parts where they were killed by them. Dante knew that those blood fiends that weren't killed by the damned dozen were killed when the Mancha Land collapsed. If there was any lower kindreds of first kindred Don Quixote, not many were still around. Don Quixote confirmed this. She can't explain how. The only explanation that she can think of is that her blood remembered them well. Some were recognized. Some voices were those that she deeply cared for. It was as if, against her own desire, she was made to ascend her father's seat. Perhaps she always was, ever since she killed him. She was struck not only by her own blood thirst, but the combined thirst of every single one of the first kindred's children. This was concerning to Gregor. Don Quixote admitted that she was also bound by that thirst, which was understandable as she's a blood fiend. All that pressure broke her sanity and she heard them all, as a higher kindred, not their friend. Sinclair didn't see it as her fault. She sees such words as meaningless now. She looked down as Rocinante had the strings neatly tied. Hohenheim informed her that the higher office will now be regularly supplying her with artificial blood packs. He said this after scribbling something in his notes. He noted that the blood substitute will be very similar to real blood in terms of composition and supply issues when it will not be a problem. This was little comfort for Don Quixote. He asked her if she'd actually believed that mere willpower would be enough to withstand that urge. She told him that she'd done quite well in suppressing it so far. Hohenheim saw this as the wick attached to the ticking time bomb within the bus department. He reminded her of the tenuous nature of her limiter, as what just happened then just demonstrated. Faust asked if the purpose of conducting that reckless experiment was to determine the full extent of the latent danger. Heathcliff believed that it was much simpler. It was just to sate curiosity. While it was convenient for him, that risk factor needed to be measured sooner or later. If he knew how dangerous that could be, he would have called for a more forceful summoning of the department. Even with the unknowns, the new information filled the void. Don Quixote lacked the words to describe what she was thinking. Hohenheim could compare reports on other blood fiends and that experiment. He wanted to know more about how she felt about the combined desire of every lower kindred. He understood that the Manchegan kindreds had all been wiped out due to La Mancha Land being destroyed, but she still heard the voice of her children. Don Quixote asked what he was trying to say. He was aiming to discuss the powerful binding force contained within blood. The distortion team's report explains that blood is not a mere carrier of nutrients, but something more. It contains abstract values. They sent in a complaint that the report was far too vague and wording. They received a reply from Moses, the on-site investigative reasoning team leader. The contents were equally fascinating. The desire for blood of their kind. This thirst for something that may as well be imbued and imprinted on the familial bloodline. Normally, the weight of the thirst is far too heavy for any individual to bear, which is why they propagate, to bear that unbearable burden together. But considering that all that desire is now focused onto an individual, due to all the others being wiped out, it's easy to understand why her sanity was so easily broken. Her will might be strong, but it's not that strong. She was the only one to bear the responsibility, the pressure, the duty of having to raise the family once again. Because the needs aren't met. The thirst was overwhelming. He found it fascinating to see how her kind preserves those abstract values in the physical form of blood. Thirst doesn't even begin to describe the intensity of what made her lose control. He admitted this oversight. Don Quixote was still in shock upon hearing this, as it made perfect sense. Hohenheim respected her efforts to be liberated from her nature, but he will highly advise her to regularly consume the provided blood packs. She understood. She wanted to take off Rocinante someday, to walk barefoot and feel the ground under her own skin. He was able to establish one positive fact from this, and this surprised Don Quixote, asking what that was. That there was those who would throw their lives to stop her, even if she was to take off her shoes. Other departments exercising separate control measures were not needed. Don Quixote was silent at this. Hohenheim had a first-hand account of her conditions. He will write the following in his report. Still quite controllable. He appreciated their efforts because he's never had much use of it himself. Don Quixote calmed herself and then faced the others, her voice full of sorrow, her voice still having a dark tone despite her speaking like a Shakespearean actress. She apologized to her friends. She'll do all that she can to keep Rocinante on her feet, never to be removed. Heathcliff told her that she had it all wrong. She's going to remove those shoes one day. That's what she was working towards. Even though she's uncertain, she agreed with him. After a brief, quiet laughter, she then asked Dante if there was something that they were hiding from her. Dante asked what she meant. She patiently awaited an answer, and Dante didn't think so. At this point, Faust was looking in their direction. This was likely them hiding the fact that P-Corp had the corpse of her father in their possession. Dante didn't know if this was the right choice, but Don Quixote seemed satisfied with the response. Dante was silent at this, anxious at Don Quixote walking away as if nothing happened. Perhaps she suspected that they were hiding something, but didn't want to press them any farther about it right now. As for her taking Rocinante off, I honestly can't see it happening. Not unless there's a similar situation to Ricardo of the Middle, and she takes them off to be able to tear that threat limb from limb and feast on the blood of her enemies. Well, if she's going to feast on human blood, she might as well do so with those that are threatening her life. Hohenheim then announced that it's over and done with. He would like them to all come gather round there. Now that the regular checkup is complete, they finally have enough data to compare their pre-employment statuses to those of their current selves. Gregor wanted to know what this meant. Hohenheim added that this included their pre-employment capabilities as well. Urtis wanted to know his conclusions. He saw no point in establishing this on a linear scale, as they are all equally mediocre right now, and Heathcliff saw plenty of significance. They want to know who's the strongest. Urtis wanted to know, in case Dante isn't there, who has the most right and authority to lead the others. Dante was about to say something, but Riju stated that she doesn't listen to anyone weaker than she is. Gregor asked if there was a reason why he was the first to introduce himself. Dante saw how they were all interested in who would be the strongest of them all, based on how strong they were prior to joining Limbus Company. Dante believed that before they lost their memories, even they. Ishmael stopped Dante before he continued that. Hohenheim was interested in seeing how they desire to get a clear picture of the pecking order, where it might lead to juvenile behaviors among children, like stealing lunches for petty reasons, like scoring higher than they did on a test. Rodia asked if he's speaking from personal experience. He ignored this and saw that it would be meaningless to conceal the outcome of the tests. Each of their placement in the line is the order that they wanted to know. They all looked at the one in front of the line, which was Yisang. This was the longest, most awkward silence Dante ever felt in their life. Yisang spoke of how they were all more than they appear, yet there's abundance within. The tests show both of his qualities. Sinclair he wants to point out something. And then Yisang wanted to place trust in the faith that they will all sprout wings as he did. Sinclair told him that it's the other way around. He's the weakest. Hohenheim confirms this as the line was made from his point of view. The strongest was Don Quixote, with that oversized lance. Now that isn't a surprise considering she is the most powerful blood fiend that is currently there. Well, she's certainly powerful enough to need a color fixer to take out. And this hit Yi-Sang hard. Sinclair tried to reassure Yi-Sang. After a pause, Don Quixote was bashful at being the center of attention. Quite fervent attention at that. Roger corrected her by saying, worried attention. Don Quixote shall be vigilant. None shall doubt that Don Quixote was the strongest, considering what she demonstrated. Ulysses didn't take that news well, believing that Ishmael was a better choice for command. Don Quixote agreed with her. She preferred a supporting role, seeing side characters as more popular. Hohenheim was relieved to see that this did not start a fight, asking if they were ready to move on from this. Gregor was unsure where he fitted into this. Roger told him that none remembers anyone between first and last place. She even forgot where she was in that. That's not what he meant. He wasn't even part of the list. And this caught Roger's attention. Heathcliff didn't see this as mattering, seeing that some fall out of the radar. They should just get on with it. Gregor was annoyed at being disrespected, like swatting a fly. Ishmael estimated that he was around her level or Heathcliff's. Her voice was that of one who had lost interest in this. Hohenheim saw him as the one with the bizarre insectoid arm. He was put in the least favored category of all researchers, exceptions. This annoyed Martin and Alyssa. It even annoyed Yi-Sang and Faust to a lesser extent. Dante saw that they really hated that. Hohenheim saw him as a unique case that can't be placed in a list or scale. It would be irresponsible to do so. He carried a certain potential. Gregor asked if he would be in first place if all went well. Hohenheim considered that it might mean the reverse, given the definition. Yi-Sang told him not to focus on this too much. His time will come. Gregor found this funny, coming from the one that was placed last. After some time passed, Hohenheim moved on to discuss the classification numbers. They have been assigning risk levels for distortions, just as they have for abnormalities. The observation logs they have written for them were of great help. His researchers struggled to make sense out the handwritten records of some of them, but it was good data regardless. Martin mentioned a 3-hour debate over a letter. Apparently it was Heathcliff who took pride in mentioning that even the governess, when he was in Wuthering Heights, gave up trying to fix his handwriting. Well, nice to know that they were decent enough to give him a basic education there. Hohenheim continued by saying that the current classification numbers had a rather significant oversight, because abnormalities were creations of the Botany Corporation. Well, most of them anyway. The classification system had to be lifted whole from their system, but the risk levels were based on energy production. The more aggressive they were, the more energy produced, but destructive capabilities were not even considered. It's why some had a lower risk level, despite their potential to kill more than one at once. Ishmael understood that, well, this was because they were an energy company. They prioritized energy outputs. Hohenheim mentioned that both abnormalities and distortions had to be suppressed via direct confrontation. So, Lobotomy Corporation's classification system is not fit for purpose. Roger mentioned that she should be wary of people who drone on and on in the intro. Ignoring Roger, he said that it became necessary for them to reorganize the distortion's risk levels and classification codes. Honglu wanted to know who'd do that. His naivety-laden question took Hohenheim back. Ishmael believed that it'd be them, as they didn't have the right to refuse. Roger was annoyingly asking if he's just offloading his own work on them. Faust told them that it's a privilege given to researchers. Heathcliff told them not to be so ignorant. It's all to research the distortions. They have to. Hohenheim saw it as the other way around. He then told them that they had to research into distortions to solve them. Ishmael saw the joke, which was all on them, that Hohenheim had control over Heathcliff. Hohenheim mentioned that Moses saw the progression of a distortion as much like a disease. If left unchecked, the distortion will change into an abnormality. Once that happens, their identity as a human is gone, replaced by, well, with what the abnormality is. Faust made it clear that the reason why it's impossible to bring back a distortion once it transforms into an abnormality, as in distortion can at least be reversed, unlike an abnormality. Gregor understood this to mean that the Time Ripper would have eventually become an abnormality if left untouched. Hohenheim referred to that one as He-7-21. That was a prediction, however, because he's not contained there. He won't be able to observe that one. Massault saw this as a correct assessment. Honglu asked if Limbus Company didn't collect the Time Ripper. Hohenheim hoped that they would, but T-Corp claimed that one, to the point where they refused to even sit at the negotiation table. He found its time-ripping ability fascinating, but even he had to cut his losses sometimes. Ishmael noted the new classification format. Hohenheim confirms this. It's difficult to identify the origin and shape of the distortion. They decided to forgo that info and instead replace them with sin affinities and expected damage scale. Faust understood PL to mean Pigretia, slope. Yisang observed that the classification now mimics classification of the Pecatula. Hohenheim confirmed this, mentioning that the Pecatula were once the origins of the distortion phenomenon and its byproducts. The affinities can be transferred one to one. Ryushi wanted to know the expected damage scale. Ishmael assumed that its combat capability, which is more meaningful than enkephalin production rates. Hohenheim made it clear that a single numerical scale of power is inconvenient, as some have variables that make it quite meaningless. So they decided to measure the expected amount of damage that they might suffer should they engage it in battle. The Time Ripper posed little threat against them, likely due to Dante making them immune to the time ripping. But the same can't be said for any others. It's why that one had 7 as the expected damage scale. Which on a scale of 1 to 10 He made it clear that this wasn't a perfect system. This was only a reference. Yisang asked if this standard would be applied to abnormalities as well. Hohenheim told them that they had plans to do so. Risk levels and expected damage scales will be coming before the classification codes. Yes, the classification codes. Speaking of which, he had something to show them. Sinclair wanted to know what that was. It was a monolith. One with the highest values among Limbus companies' business. Apparently, the development of transportation, management, and processing methodologies of the monolith was a glowing achievement. Yisang saw the danger of that artifact by its very nature. He hesitated to use it so willingly. Hohenheim argued that they are beset by danger at all times. He saw how dangerous something was as based on the degree to which it poses a risk, reminding them that it can force a distortion. Now, Hohenheim made it clear that there's more than one of them, much like the Golden Bowels, which implies that they might be old Lobotomy Corporation tech. Well, before the Lobotomy Corporation was a wing, as while Cogito was used to make abnormalities in its later years. That was likely not what they used to begin with. It's possible that they used the monoliths to distort people, and then this resulted in abnormalities in the early days of their research into the disease of the mind. The monoliths were in the possession of the Fingers and other syndicates at first, but is being collected by legitimate companies. Martin spoke of some wings seeing them as priority targets. Hohenheim was thankful that they researched, sought them out and collected the monoliths earlier than the others. They can process and sell them, which expanded their business ventures. They were able to narrowly avoid having to fight with the Wings to possess them, as this might require them to confront the Wings. If that was the case, well, Dante was silently unnerved by his attitude, which could be summed up with, "If we don't collect them and sell them, someone else will." Ishmael asked what would happen if they were ever assigned a city-level threat. Roger cautioned Ishmael against asking such questions, as the answers might be much worse. Ishmael asked what if, due to a contract making them go against the associations? It'd be good to know ahead of time. Ortiz saw this as a good question. Hohenheim saw them as urban plague at weakest and urban nightmare at strongest. Now that sounds about right, as they had the floor wiped with them when they dealt with a big brother of the middle. The Fingers being starved of city-level threats. Certainly above their grunts. Ryushu was disappointed that they weren't SOC yet, and Hohenheim noted that she sounds like she wants to be, given that threat level. Due to their ability to revive and their identities, they can be a troublesome risk, but there is an obvious weakness. Faust made it clear that if Dante dies, their advantages go with them. This made Dante the center of their attention. Sinclair asked, what if they protected them? Hohenheim was impressed by his optimism, given that was faced so far, or rather, what was faced so far, mentioning Siegfried, who wiped them out as a punishment in the checkpoint in District 11, knowing that death was a temporary setback to them, or Big Brother Ricardo, which I've already covered, along with if Sancho attacked Dante with her full strength, asking if they would be enough to protect them. Don Quixote didn't look so confident about that. Hohenheim understood that Dante will be preserved, that no such thing may come to pass. Faust stopped him there, and warned him that anything farther will result in a disciplinary committee being opened to discuss the consequences of his careless words. Hohenheim understood that it was too soon to speak of that. He told them that they had a starved the city potential, but he warned them against getting to that, and reminded them that this is only true as long as they have backing of Limbus company. Now, this was another way of saying you were given this power to better facilitate your duties, which can just be easily taken away. A veiled threat. Hohenheim informs them that they are almost done with the regular checkup. Finally, they have a chance for them to overcome an adversary based on what they have learned so far, and for him to prove his hypothesis. Dante wanted to know what he was talking about. He told Dante that there was no need to worry. They never have been wrong. Most of the time. This experiment is entirely of his own design and supervision. He will fully follow his own curiosities and instincts as a researcher, as he revealed a monolith behind him. Rodia already wasn't going to like where this was going. Hohenheim brought the monolith to their attention. Ishmael recognized it. He told them that his researchers will activate the artifact. This was alarming to Gregor. Although Hohenheim made it clear that it wouldn't be activated on Gregor. Yeah, it's too soon for his unfinished business to be resolved, which would likely involve a boss battle involving the others against giant cockroach Gregor. Hohenheim understood that none of them would be willing participants to that. Ishmael implied that she would get violent if he was going to force them to distort, saying that they have no right to refuse. Yeah, even that excuse has limits. Heathcliff, speaking from personal experience of having distorted, wasn't going to let him do that, even as his assistant. Urti suggested sending their weakest for that. Dante looks at her with disapproval, which stopped her from continuing. Just as well as that would be Yi Sang. Thankfully, Hohenheim didn't want anyone to risk themselves except him. Urtis looks at him as if he was insane. He was going to distort himself? He confirms this, asking if they're curious to see what kind of distortion they'd end up becoming. A question that they might have all entertained once. Well, Heathcliff wasn't, as he can speak from personal experience. It wasn't very pleasant. Yeah, he turned into a giant feral doggy. Hohenheim advised him to stop gritting his teeth like that. It would have an adverse effect on his long-term dental health. Ishmael asked, what if he would end up as a Pecatulum, one of those they slaughtered during the tests earlier? Was he willing to take that risk? Hohenheim couldn't ignore that possibility. It would signify nothing more than his own limitations, a mediocre shell, if that happened. They'd transport him to a containment unit. They even made a bet on what kind he'd turn into. Martin told them that Hohenheim bet on gluttony, he on envy, and Alyssa on sloth. They seriously bet on that? Employment standards are almost as bad as lobotomy corporations. Sinclair asked, how could he? Hohenheim saw it as like this. If he became a peccatula, it'd be like losing a game of chance. As for the definition of loss, it depends on what he'd become at the time. But turning into a peccatula alone would remove any value to his life. Dante saw that being too hard on himself was too simple to describe his tone. He didn't want to be transported to a containment unit. He wanted to be killed and get it over with. Yeah, that would do him a favor. He's aware that he's not the most charismatic and that he's not the most likable. So he saw no reason for them not to cut him down without hesitation. Even though Sinclair with his gentle heart might hesitate at this. But once he's a peccatulum, Hohenheim will no longer exist, so guilt won't stop them from killing what he would turn into. Faust didn't argue about that. Ishmael asked, what if something unexpected happened? This is his life they're talking about. Does he have any manuals with backup plans, or... Hohenheim saw it as a coin flip, which annoyed Faust somewhat. Hohenheim wished to humiliate the field of mathematical statistics, unlike the more typical academics. He sees a romanticism to research. It's more exciting to run as many tests and gain as many samples as he can, than to be stuck behind a desk going over documents and books. Either they dispose of him and the employees take care of the rest, telling them to destroy the key in his coat pocket and the files inside his cabinets. Alyssa remembered that, and if he distorted, they would be halfway to success. He envied them. He wanted to witness his own distortion. This confused Ishmael. Hohenheim reminded her of his lectures, wanting her to create a classification code for his distortion, going by the standards they discussed earlier. His expectations of that was low, as he understood that they just nod along with his words, pretending to understand to not be rude. Martin silently confirmed this. Hohenheim expected Dante to open the entrance to his dungeon of the Fathoms. They will progress through it, like they have done when facing a distortion, to reach the deepest fathoms to face him. He wished the best of luck with their suppression efforts. Ryushi was looking forward to slicing him into 6 pieces. If they made it that far, they either find him unconscious or, if fortunate, conscious. Gregor questioned the safety of this. Hohenheim saw that variance between cases is expected. It might take some time for him to recover fully, but if they succeed, it will happen. Martin was reminded that was how bamboo-hatted Kim was brought back. This reminded Utis of the mentor and one of the 2 surviving members of the Blade lineage, the exiled protectors of the nobility of District 19, Yisang's home district, asking if he recovered. Alyssa confirmed that he was. He was safely contained within their facilities. Hohenheim was ready to activate the monolith. He was confident that, even as a distortion, he would be quite the exceptional specimen. Heathcliff asked if he was going to do that just like that. Hong Lu could see that as the monolith was distorting Hohenheim, that he wasn't a Pecatulum. The distorted Hohenheim noticed this, and he looks like something that wouldn't be out of place in the Star Wars universe. He could still hear them. He remembered. He still did. Marton knew that he'd be back, but it was still unnerving. Dante told him that they'd bring him back no matter what. Faust translated this to Marton and Alyssa. The latter saw Dante as dependable. She wanted them to look at this, and Dante saw a note asking if Hohenheim wrote tips on what to do. Alyssa told them that all they had to do is read what's on the note in front of the distortion. Apparently it's some kind of code, and Dante knew that they couldn't read this out in a way that'd be understood, so they asked Nassault to read it, and he did so. He read, Lobotomy Corporation, 5 minutes, potentiality, anticipation, right hand. This created a portal around Hohenheim as though it was a key to the door. Familiar yet different sights were behind the veil. Hohenheim had already entered the portal, but they could still hear his voice. He believes that he would be forced to share his past there. He never wanted to share this or believes that any would care to learn about. For the sake of that department, he would need to endure it. He'd need and expose every detail of it, seeing it as all in the past. How has he not been put in front of a disciplinary committee due to gross negligence leading to endangerment of personnel? If Limbus Company is planning to fill the wing slot for District 12, it's looking to be a strong candidate for that, as they have a similar disregard for safety regulations. Well, looks like next it's the mirror junction of the Falcons. Until next time, hail the rabbits!